They tried to shut them up.
There's no guarantee to free speech.
They tried to cancel them.
Deplatforming works.
They even threw them in jail.
Peter Navarro,
Steve Bannon,
now in prison.
But they couldn't stop them.
It's not a prison bill that will ever shut me up.
They call them rebels.
Basket of deplorables.
They call them rogues.
They claim to guns or religion.
And they say they're outlaws.
These are the kind of guys you like to smack in the ass.
War Room presents Rebels, Rogues, and Outlaws.
You set out to take Vienna. Take Vienna.
The national bestseller by longtime Bannon producer Dan Fluette. Take a journey through the pictorial history of War Room in a culture that celebrates the weak. Show your support by standing with the rebels. Go to doitfluette.com or scan the QR code on your screen. Use the code RAV20 for 20% off your order. Stand with the rebels and never back down.
Good evening, America, and welcome to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, Securing a More Fair Future on Trade. It sounds good, right? We want to thank our partners at AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, for joining us in this conversation. All throughout tonight's show, we'll be taking a deep dive into President Trump's tariff policies, if they can be successful in bringing back manufacturing to America, decoupling from the Chinese economy, and creating fairer trade around the globe, which means more jobs and more economic growth in America. President Trump's deal-making ability has and will be put to the test. This is a big mission, right? But according to the White House, countries are lining up for meetings with the administration to hammer out new trade deals that work for everyone. And we will talk about that all throughout the hour with a great lineup of guests we have included for you, including Missouri Congressman Eric Burlison, who will be breaking down what Congress can do to support President Trump's agenda of free and fair trade around the globe. We'll also have Stephen Moore here, the great economist who literally wrote the book on President Trump's economic policy. He'll explain what the goal of the president's tariff policy is and how he can use them effectively in trade negotiations. We'll also speak to China expert Gordon Chang. He is absolutely the best on this issue. And he'll tell us about what President Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods actually means for their economy, something that doesn't get mentioned in the media. The CCP might be talking very tough right now, but they are only doing that to mask the pain of what tariffs are causing on their side. I think that's what a lot of our intelligence experts believe. And finally, we'll have a candidate for governor of Maine and a former assistant secretary of state, as well as AMAC's national spokesman. He's my good friend, Bobby Charles. He'll be here to break down how the statecraft of these tariffs actually work and how America can bring even more nations to the table on free and fair trade. But before we get to all that tonight, I want to bring in my co-host for the evening. Usually we have AMAC CEO Rebecca Weber here with us, but she's on the road, and tonight we're lucky to be joined by another very special guest, Senior Vice President at AMAC, Charles Stuckland. Charles, good to have you on.
Great to be on, John. Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. I'm Charles Stuckland. I'm honored to join tonight's special edition as your voice from AMAC, where we don't just talk about America's future, we fight for it every day. To our AMAC members watching, thank you so much. You've carried this country on your back. You've worked the jobs. You've paid the taxes. You've raised the families, and you've built the communities that made America strong. Now you're watching some of that hard work get chipped away by cheap imports, disappearing jobs, and global policies that never seem to put Americans first. So tonight, we're having a conversation about tariffs, but really it's about fairness. It's about the cost of letting other nations play by their rules while Americans pay the price. It's really about restoring the balance and bringing back something that's been missing: respect for American work, American products, and American sovereignty. And for those of you who aren't members, if you're tired of being talked over, overlooked, or forgotten, we hope you'll join us, because at AMAC, your voice isn't just heard, it shapes what we do. So thank you so much for having me tonight, John. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, Charles, it's going to be a blast. This is such a great conversation, and AMAC has been on the forefront of this debate long before it was in the news. They've been pushing for fair and free trade, something the word fair wasn't in the last 30 years of American policy. We're finally getting it, and tonight we're going to dive in right away from a member of Congress who's on top of this issue and trying to back up the president in the halls of Congress. All right, joining us now, a man on the front lines of the tariff debates in Congress, Congressman Eric Burlison from the great state of Missouri. Congressman, good to have you back on the show.
Great to be back, John.
So I want to turn to tariffs and all the debates that we have about them, but just a little breaking news today. President Trump is putting into action new orders that will require Act Blue to be investigated and for the government to develop a whole of government approach to make sure that foreign money doesn't seep in through online fundraising. You've been on this for a long time. You know what the concerns are. Your reaction to the fact that President Trump, the Justice Department are on the case now?
Yeah, something has to be done. I mean, look, the amount of money that was the velocity of money that was flowing in, and the fact that I don't know if you saw the study that James O'Keefe did, where he went door to door and knocked on the doors of people that from one address have made, hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions over 5,000 different individual contributions, all attributed to one person at one address. And most of these homes are people that clearly do not have the funds to do that. Yep. And he again and again would knock on those doors. So look, those are anecdotal scenarios, but something is wrong here. And so where there's smoke, there's probably fire.
Yeah, good point.
A great point. Anecdotally is one thing, but when you have sort of a coordinated situation of tens of thousands of microtransactions, it leads you to believe there's some sort of coordination there. So we appreciate that. But getting back to the tariffs, Congressman, so we have 12 states that are now suing to stop some of these tariffs. How should Congress respond when state-level actors challenge federal trade policy, especially when the aim is to revive American manufacturing?
Yeah, this is one of the. I try to take a step back and think if the shoes were on the other feet, what would I do? If Joe Biden, if I was a state lawmaker and Joe Biden had tried to do this, I would. While I may not agree with whatever he was doing, I would say he constitutionally has the authority. I mean, I don't see what kind of grounds that they're making when at the end of the day, this is clearly in the purview of the federal government. And look, my view on tariffs in general is that I want tariffs and taxes to be as low as possible. But I also think that the fact that we've had an imbalance for decades is something that we need to address. And I'm glad that Trump is trying to do something that has not been done by previous presidents, trying to bring these other countries to the table and end some of these trade imbalances that have been happening since World War II.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely since World War II. It's somewhat analogous after World War II. You had the reinvestment into places like Japan, for example, auto manufacturers, places like Toyota. And then in the 80s, you saw similar style tariffs from Reagan protecting American workers. So it's really not the first time. It's just the most excessive we've ever seen in history. Can you speak, when it comes to AMEC members, our aging demographic, specifically constituents in Missouri. Can you talk about the ag sector, the manufacturing sector, and getting away from the tariff discussion, how hard have they been hit from, let's just say, not losing our middle class, but exporting our middle class overseas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, look, unfortunately, the way Social Security is funded and the way that the United States is working, our economy is really dependent upon a growing class of workers, and we have a diminishing size in the workforce. People are not having children like they used to, and so we definitely want more people in the labor pool. We want to be a growing economy, and we need those people to be able to support people that are retiring. And so this is why Social Security is estimated to go defunct in the next 9 to 11 years. We need to really figure out, this is a big question that Congress needs to address. And at the end of the day, we need to bring jobs into the United States. How we fill those jobs, what level of immigration, legal immigration that we do is another question.
Yeah, those are all big ones and things that Congress can play a role on. What are the sentiments, sir, in Congress to help the president get through this period and to get to success? You got 90 countries lined up to make deals. China's playing footsie behind the scene with some negotiations. What can Congress do to make this story a success story when it's all over?
I think that one of the things we can do is first just give the president the space to negotiate, give him that flexibility. I think he's earned it mean, look, the guy took a bullet to the head for this country. Let's give him the grace to carry through on the things that he campaigned on, and the voters knew when they went to the polls to vote for him. So let's give him that space. And then also, I think we need to back him up when it comes to this reconciliation package. The president wants to check a lot of boxes, and I think that they're achievable if we cut spending. So he wants to move towards a balanced budget. He wants to reduce interest rates. He wants to reduce inflation. All of that can be done, and we can pay for the Trump tax cuts and make them permanent if we can find the spending cuts that we need to find. And Congress needs to do the difficult work of identifying and cutting spending, just like Elon Musk and Doge has been doing.
Yeah, important.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the comparison between cutting the spending and cutting the spending, I mean, that's obviously the most important thing, right? It's been said that sort of what Doge has found so far is a drop in the bucket on the overspending. What's your take on the status of what's been found so far, and are you optimistic that they're really going to have a huge effect on the government waste, the government fraud?
Yeah, I think that this is a question not about Elon. I think it's a question of the willingness of the other members of the cabinet to really lean in on their agencies and get them to cooperate. And this is what we're requesting is a sea change sometimes in work policy and workflow. So I certainly think that there could be more done, but I don't want to criticize the executive branch. They're doing a heck of a lot more than Congress is doing. So we've got to step up. And I think that one of the ways that we can step up is to cut mandatory spending in this reconciliation package. That means finding savings, waste, fraud, and abuse, and Medicaid. That means eliminating the Green New Scam tax credits. Savings that if we could identify, I think we could identify. Jody Arrington thinks has done the work. We could probably identify $5 trillion or more in savings over the next 10 years. But look, we're not even. I think the modest version of that is a $2 trillion savings over the next 10 years. If we can do that, it will, when Congress reduces spending, it will do a number of things. It will drive down inflation, because inflation is when the government spends more than it brings in. So it'll bring down inflation. If we can, and it will also reduce interest rates on the market, because when we're spending more and we're taking out more debt, we're out there buying debt from the market and we're driving up interest rates. It will go a long ways. If we could just figure out how to cut spending, we will solve a lot of problems and make Donald Trump the most successful president in the history of the United States.
Yeah. So we got about a minute left. Just a real quick question. China, you have been such an articulate voice on it. Your state sued, held them accountable, won $24 billion for COVID, but they attack us in many different ways. They do it through TikTok. They do it through flavored covered vapes. They do it through fentanyl. And then they do it by exploiting the trade privileges. Do you think most Americans understand that China has been getting a free ride for most of the last 4 years from our country?
Yeah, I think most Americans recognize that China has not been cooperating, that they have not been a noble actor on the world stage. And I think that I think this is long overdue, what President Trump, his posture towards China. It's my hope that other countries like India and countries around the world, the Western civilization, that we all unite together. And I think that if we do, and China comes to kind of a former Soviet Union moment where they realize that they either must change or they'll collapse. I think that this is Donald Trump's moment, the same way that Reagan had that moment where he pushed Russia to the Soviet Union to the point of collapse. I think that for Trump, this is the moment with China.
Yeah, something we have to keep in mind. There's so much short-term focus, but the long-term picture is so much important to keep in the front of our minds. You do that every day in the great perch that you hold in Congress. Congressman Eric Burlison, great honor to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, appreciate you. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, the man who wrote the book on President Trump's economic policy. Stephen Moore will be here. I always love when he comes on. I always find like the economy gets a lot more understandable when he talks about it. Before we do that, I want you to do me a favor. Go to amac.us/justnews. That's amac.us/justnews, or point your camera to that QR code, because right now you can join me, become a 5-year member at AMAC for 47% off. It's like $31 a year. That's a steal. You get discounts. You get opportunities to engage in civic duty. You get monthly magazine, daily news, and a weekly podcast. It is one of the greatest deals you'll ever have. Go check it out today. amac.us/justnews. While you're doing that, we're going to take a quick commercial break here from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, Securing a More Fair Future on Trade, brought to you by AMAC. I'm still joined by the Senior Vice President from AMAC, Charles Stuckland. He's going to be my co-host for the whole hour. And now I'm excited to welcome one of my favorite friends. He makes the economy understandable. He makes it exciting, and he always gives you the straight scoop. He is the author of The Trump Economic Miracle and the co-founder of Unleash Prosperity. He's our good friend, Stephen Moore. Steve, good to have you back on.
Hello, gentlemen. Great to be with you.
Good to be with you, and good to be with you on this day. There's a lot going on, and the markets seem to be a little schizophrenic. One day they're really down, the next day they're a little bit up. But you have been very confident. You've been sounding optimism that the way Trump's going about this may be a real winner. Why are you so positive?
Well, at the beginning, I was a skeptic, as you know, John. I thought
that's right.
Trump has really gotten himself into a thicket that he might not be able to get out of with all the, and we saw those big declines in the stock market, and people started to panic. But Trump really, this guy's shrewd. He really is two moves on the chessboard ahead of everybody else. And right now, I'm feeling pretty confident. Not entirely, and I'm not saying that the motion sickness that we've all had on the stock market is over. I think we're going to have up days and down days based on the progress that's been made. But it sure looks a lot better than it did a couple weeks ago. And if we can get these major deals done, and then, John, if we can keep moving forward on the tax bill,
yep.
Boy, that's a double header that is just unbelievable for the economy. And I think you could see a real boom this summer in the stock market.
Absolutely. And Steve, when it comes to the volatility, it almost seems as Trump is setting the tone, sort of managing expectations there, where with this level of volatility, if we do come up with a tax bill, we negotiate some fair trade deals, with Asia, European countries, all it takes is a few pieces of good news, potentially a reduction on some maybe corporate income tax. And I mean, I'm assuming what you're thinking is just a wealth of international investment into manufacturing in different sectors in the U.S. Is that kind of best case scenario in your mind?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of countries that we still need to deal with. There's like 6 or 7, major countries that really matter: Canada, the UK, the Europeans, Japan, Korea, et cetera. If we can get those deals done, you don't have to have 100 countries. You just need to have the G7, G8 countries come to an agreement where they lower their tariffs. Then Trump will lower his tariffs. Now, China's another whole kettle of worms, and I think the strategy here is to try to isolate China economically, which would be good for our security and for our economy. I don't know anybody else but Donald Trump who could pull this off.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Steve,
Absolutely.
I know for most of your career you've been an advocate for free trade. You like free and fair trade. But you came on my show a couple weeks ago. You said something I think very profound, which is you can be a free trade advocate, but you can also realize there's a time to level the playing field with someone that's been cheating or getting an unfair advantage for a long time when it comes to China. Remind people how China has sort of been treated as a third world country when the rest of us have, when we've been giving away a lot, but we don't get a lot in return from China.
Well, the short history of China is, they were a communist country under Mao. Mao was the greatest butcher who ever lived on the face of the planet. He killed 300 million people of his own people. And then in the mid-'80s or so, China went on a very free market path. And it looked really good that they were going to become a freedom-loving and a free market capitalism country. And that's the way it was for about a decade. And so we gave China the most favored trade nation. We allowed them into the all the GATT and that kind of thing. And I think that was a mistake because under President Xi, they've moved in the opposite direction. They are now an evil empire, and we've got to get, in my opinion, by the way, you guys are more of experts on this than I am, but I think they're dangerous. I think they cheat. I think they steal, and we cannot continue to allow that to happen.
Absolutely. We talk at length about currency manipulation, subsidies, regulation. So what you touched on there also is not necessarily just about tariffs. Can you also talk to the trade barriers? Do you think there's any ongoing discussion on not just the tariffs, but those other things that are make it harder for American companies to export overseas that aren't necessarily tariffs, but are sort of wrapped into the trade barrier system when it comes to regulation and things like that?
Yeah, the worst one of all to me is that they steal our technology and our patents. Have you noticed every time we come up with a new product, like a new iPhones 8, all the Chinese do come and take pictures of it and try to figure out how they can copycat it. They do the same with our drugs, our vaccines, our all sorts of inventions that we make, and then they steal the processes, and then our companies can't make any money on it. So I would put that very near the top of the list. Other countries do that too, by the way, and that's just not fair. I mean, the Europeans, they don't pay their fair share of the drug costs when we invent new drugs. So we got to get tough with these countries and say pay your fair share.
Yeah, amazing.
John, I think it's estimated around $500 billion a year just in intellectual property theft. Exactly what you're talking there, Steve, on just the copying of our intellectual property, our products, our manufacturing processes, and in a lot of ways, sort of our own doing, right? And that's what we're talking about today.
The other thing I wanted to mention, John, if I could, is that, this tax bill is moving along pretty well. They're now talking about 4th of July. I wanted Memorial Day. Remember, John? I said we got to get done by Memorial Day, but now it looks like it might be 4th of July. That's a big deal. And I want to see the 15% business rate that Trump was talking about during the campaign. Remember that? He said maybe we can get the business rate down to 15%. My God, if he can do that and then make all the tax cuts permanent, and that is steroids for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that there's that moment on the horizon. If he pulls it all off, that the economy could be booming like post-World War II or the good old 90s again. I want to ask about China. You said something profound. If we get some of these other trade agreements in place, China's isolated, and then there are other tools once it's isolated that the president can use. For instance, in 2013, Vice President Joe Biden, on behalf of President Obama, gave an MOU to China that says your companies can be on our stock market, but they don't have to comply with our regulatory retaliatory options. If you start pulling things like that off the table with 30 days notice, China really is in a much harder position to negotiate, right?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, people don't realize the media, thank God for people like you who are actually reporting what's happening. But how many stories have you read about what's happening with the stock market and the economy in China? Not many, right?
None.
Well, they're headed to a Great Depression if they can't trade with the United States, and their stock market's taken a beating, much worse than ours has. So my point is, if we, when we sneeze, they catch pneumonia, right? And so they have a lot to lose here. I think China is going to be brought to the table on their hands and knees to, as Trump would say, to make a deal with Trump, because their economy cannot withstand this. They will go into a Great Depression if they lose the trade routes to the United States and our, $22 trillion consumer market.
Great point.
Absolutely, the largest consumer market amongst nations, and what we've been talking about is, who's going to blink first on this. And Donald Trump's shown that we don't necessarily need, the throwaway culture of Chinese products. There are, we talk about active ingredients in pharmaceuticals. We talk about some necessary imports into the U.S., but for the most part, maybe we don't need a lot of this throwaway culture, plastic, mass landfill clothing style, consumerism in the U.S. And the irony is, you would think that those that champion scalability and the climate crisis and energy consumption and reducing carbon footprint, you would think those would be the people that would be all for domestic production, reducing fuel consumption on overseas shipping. You would think they'd be for Elon Musk and energy efficient vehicles and EVs, but Steve, it seems like those are the very people that are out in the media criticizing the tariffs and this entire situation.
I was believe it or not, guys, I was on CNN yesterday, which I don't do very often, but I do now and then. And they were like, oh, there's Trump. He's retreating on his trade stuff. And I'm like, you people don't get this guy. He started with 125% tariff on China. Oh, okay, well, maybe lower it to 100%. They don't understand that everything Trump does is part of the art of the deal. But I'd like to make one other quick point, which is really about AMAC, because you're such an effective organization, and we need to start a movement of Buy America, Sell China. Buy America, Sell China. This is something every one of us as individuals can do to change the direction of what's going on in our country. Look for the union label. Look for the label that says Made in America, or at least look for the label that says not, Made in China. And if it's Made in China, is it okay if you pay $2 or $3 more for a T-shirt or $4 more for some sneakers? I think if we all make that commitment, I think that would have a huge impact. We don't have the government to tell us what to do. We can do this as individual consumers. I can't tell you, John, people come up to me, what can I do as one person? Stop buying their crap.
Buy America, Sell China. I think that's going to stick. I like that one. People are going to be talking about that tomorrow morning, Steve. That's a good one. You are always a pleasure to have on, my friend. We learn so much, and we get a lot wiser when you're on. Thanks for joining us today. What a great conversation, folks. We are so lucky. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Gordon Chang will be here to discuss what President Trump's tariffs look like from China's perspective. And while we're in the break, do me a favor. Here's a homework assignment. Go to amac.us/justnews right now. Go get one of those 5-year memberships. I'm a 5-year card-carrying member of AMAC. I'm proudly so, by the way. It pays for itself every time I travel. It's an amazing discount you get, plus all the other benefits. The magazine, the weekly podcast, the opportunity to do great things with other patriots, civic duty things. They're awesome. All because you're a member of AMAC. You're going to get 47% off a 5-year membership right now. amac.us/justice. That's the place to go do that. During a commercial break, we'll be right back.
goes into the band there.
Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report. We're taking a deep dive into President Trump's tariff policies, and we're doing so in conjunction with our good friends at AMAC. In this segment, we're going to focus on China. It's at the heart of this entire policy, and I want to bring in my co-host for tonight, AMAC Senior Vice President Charles Stuckland, as well as author of the new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He is one of the most extraordinary experts on China, and long before we were having a public debate about tariffs, Gordon Chang was on the front lines of encouraging it as an important tool to level the playing field with China. We're very lucky to be joined by Gordon Chang. Gordon, good to have you on.
Well, thank you so much, John and Charlie.
All right, so I want to start with the notion that China's talking tough maybe on the outside, but on the inside, are they feeling as comfortable about getting into a tariff controversy with the president, or does their economy have some weaknesses as well?
Their economy is actually in distress. They reported 5.4% growth for the first quarter, but when we look at underlying indicators, it looks more like zero. And we know the direction, which is down. Price data for both February and March indicate the Chinese economy is in a deflationary spiral. That's very hard to get out of. And we also see some other numbers that look like China was actually contracting during the period. So, for instance, tax receipts were down 3.5%. That's not consistent with robust growth. So we're seeing an economy that is being hit by the tariff dispute at a time when it is in trouble. And so, yes, I think the Chinese understand that they got problems. The issue, though, John, is the political system in China. Xi Jinping has configured it so that only the most hostile answers are considered to be acceptable. So he can't make an overture to the United States, which would be the rational thing for him to do, because he cannot appear weak.
Wow.
Following up on that, Gordon, I remember you once referenced an article in the People's Daily from 2019, I believe it was May 2019, titled "The People's War on Us." Can you give some context from the perspective of, let's say, a Chinese citizen, the difference between the political and the economic as it relates to how the populace in China is sort of viewing this situation?
Yeah, People's War is a term that has great resonance in Communist Party thought. It is a total war, which PLA Daily, which is the main propaganda organ of the Chinese military, said is total war. And this goes back to Mao Zedong's struggle against Chiang Kai-shek. And that means we are considered to be an enemy. Now, China has this doctrine of unrestricted warfare, which means that they can do anything and everything they want to take us down. So it's not just a tariff struggle from the viewpoint of the Communist Party. This is an existential struggle. And Charlie, the Communist Party views us as an existential threat, not because of anything that we say or do, but because of who we are. An insecure regime in Beijing is worried about the inspirational impact of America's values and form of governance on the Chinese people. So, unfortunately, we will never have amicable relations with China as long as the Communist Party rules it.
Very important. So, Gordon, I want to ask real quickly, there are a lot of levers that President Trump has yet to pull. Obviously, there's the early escalating tariffs, and there's a little bit of de-escalation, which the markets have welcomed. But he has other things that China has gotten broad access to our markets. For instance, in 2013, Joe Biden, under President Trump, put a memorandum of understanding that let Chinese companies that were on Wall Street continue to stay on Wall Street even if they didn't comply with all of our regulatory fiat that the Democrats had imposed on American companies. If he were to pull things out like that, China would have to snap to attention a lot quicker, right?
Yes, well, that 2013 memorandum was unjustified. In other words, giving China access to our markets under terms which were more favorable than companies from any other country. Basically, they didn't have to comply with disclosure rules to the same extent as everybody else. And disclosure is the key to America's regulation of companies that have gone public. So this certainly is an important lever. If President Trump were to pull that memorandum, which I hope that he does, Chinese companies probably would have to delist because they could not comply with the disclosure requirements. So yes, this is something, among many other things, John, that President Trump could do to put more pressure on the Chinese.
Gordon, do you think, as it relates to the disclosure, when we talk about things like transshipment, China going ahead and using Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam as sort of proxy centers to do a small amount of manufacturing to avoid the inbound tariffs, you have currency manipulation, you have subsidies, you have lack of regulation in China. Is a delisting strategy, is that a direction that could handle some of what we call CSRs, currency, subsidies, and regulation disagreements between the United States economies and the Chinese economy?
Well, I think they are separate, but the Chinese view everything in totality, which means that if we were to do something with regard to listing of Chinese companies, they would view that as part of an all-encompassing struggle. So in a sense, yes, it relates to everything else. And we have to do something about the transshipment. The Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, has actually talked to some of the countries that you mentioned and to others about the transshipment issue. Also, there's an issue not only of transshipment, but of false bills of lading. So China will directly ship products from Chinese factories to the United States, but they'll come in with a bill of lading that says manufactured in Vietnam. And the authorities in Vietnam know what's going on. Obviously, we have to end this. I think we're making some progress on this in the last month or so, but this is just one of a number of things that we have to do on trade.
Gordon, I want to ask a little bit about whether you believe there are substantive talks going on with China. President Trump says they blinked, they wanted to talk first. Mike Waltz was on the show just on Tuesday saying, yeah, they came to us and said we want to have talks. China says we're not talking at all. What do you think's really going on behind the scenes?
My guess is that the National Security Advisor was telling the truth, that there have been back-channel discussions, maybe at a lower level, certainly not at the level of President Trump to Xi Jinping, but nonetheless, I do believe they're going on, which means that the Chinese today were actually lying when they said that there were no discussions, no talks on trade. And we got to remember that President Trump, in the last couple days, has been sending out sort of signals that he wants to talk. China viewed those as backing down and has become intransigent, which shows you the Chinese political system is frozen.
Interesting. Yeah.
How long, Gordon, do you think the Chinese can hold out? I mean, the United States being a powerhouse of consumers, what is it, between almost a third, maybe larger of the global consumption. Who, in this game of chicken, who really can last longer?
That's really a question of President Trump. I think that he was just doing a Jedi mind trick on the markets, trying to appease them. But remember, almost all the high cards are held by our president. The only way China wins is to pressure him to back down. And a lot of people say, well, President Trump has blinked, he's folded. I'm not sure that's the case, but this is China's only real hope. And Xi Jinping, because the way he has basically configured the Chinese political system, he's perfectly capable of taking China off the cliff before he actually has substantive discussions with the U.S. And that is just an indication of how bad things are in China. So the issue is, I think President Trump holds out, and I think we win this. But the question is, it's the will and the determination of one person, the guy who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest.
Yeah, it does come down there. The ball starts and stops here. There's no doubt. Gordon, we got about a minute left. Just real quickly, why has it that America has continued to treat China, at least regulatory-wise, like a third world economy when it's the second largest economy in the globe?
This is just a failure, not only of the United States, but of everybody else, of giving China developing economy status when it is so developed in many respects. This is just wrong, and it shows you that we need to move and change things that have been in place for decades.
Yeah, well, you have been sounding the alarm and creating that blueprint by which Donald Trump is now executing a lot of these strategies. It's a great honor, Gordon, always having the show. Thanks for some great insights tonight.
Well, it's a great honor for me to talk to you and Charlie, so thank you.
Well, we appreciate you so much. Folks, go get his great books. They are the roadmap to how we really should need to be dealing with China. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, our good friend Bobby Charles is here. Before we get to that, everybody go to amac.us/justnews. This is your homework assignment. During the commercial break, there's a very special offer, 47% off a 5-year membership. That is great. I'm a 5-year card-carrying member. You should be too. amac.us/justnews. Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, Securing a More Fair Future on Trade, brought to you by AMAC. I'm still joined by my co-host for tonight, AMAC Senior Vice President Charles Stuckland, and it's time to bring in not only AMAC's national spokesman, but one of the most learned people I ever talked to in Washington. He's a former Assistant Secretary of State, a great friend of the show, and now he's a Republican candidate for governor in Maine. Yep, you heard me right. He's going to run for governor. Our good friend, Bobby Charles. Bobby, welcome back.
It is a blast to be with you guys always.
Soon we may have to call you governor. That will be even a bigger blast. We'll have to see how that goes.
Well, all right. If people want to do it, go to bobbyformaine.com, and I'm right there.
Yeah, you're lighting up. People are buzzing all over the Northeast. Let me start with something that you are so articulate on. We're in this moment of tariffs, but there is a history to free trade. And we were all here in the 90s. You and I were both here in Washington when it started, and it sounded great, except it was free trade for the rest of the world, but it was pretty unfair trade for America. We kept making successions and putting up with behavior that we didn't let, that others could not have to comply with. Tell us how free trade turned out not to be that free trade at all for America.
Yeah, so let's see if I can do this in 30 seconds. Many moons ago, when Richard Nixon was president, we ended up opening China. That was a great thing politically. They thought that if you give China lots and lots of advantages, they will take advantage of them, which they did, and they will exercise or become affiliated with, or they will understand the concept of economic freedom. And if you do that, they will understand the concept of political freedom. Well, it turns out what they did is they interpreted it as a giveaway, and that they would just take advantage of us in every possible way, and they never did adopt the political freedom side. So that was error number one, and we're still paying for that. Error number two is administrations, Republican and Democrat, for the last 30 years anyway, maybe 40, have allowed trade barriers to grow up. They've allowed companies to be subsidized by countries. So Canada subsidizes their lumber production. They do all the harvesting for their companies. France owns a part of Air France. All of these countries were allowed to undertake these relatively unfair trade advantages that they adopted to themselves. Some of them set up quotas. Some of them set up import quotas, so you can only ship so many cars into that country. But they were unlimited in how they could ship them here. And of course, they also took advantage of things like cheap labor, even slave labor. And that's one of the reasons that Chinese products are so inexpensive. Their labor is the same thing with Mexico. And the United States allowed our companies, because we thought that free trade would generate the outcomes that would ultimately benefit everybody, instead of just using comparative advantage, you grow corn and I make shoes, and we switch back and forth with those. We trade them because you're better at corn and I'm better at shoes. Instead of that, it became an unfair nightmare for Americans, because what happened is our wages stayed as they should at a relatively high level. Our companies began to put all their capital and all their jobs on foreign soil. Now what Donald Trump has done is said, you know what, we're done with all of that. What we're going to do is bring all that capital home, all those jobs home. We're going to reset the field bilaterally, one-on-one with all these countries, so that you are no longer allowed to take advantage of the American consumer, and in turn ultimately put us in a position where we don't have the jobs, we don't have the wages, we don't have the growth that we could have had. What's going to happen is there'll be a slight uptick in the near term in inflation, and I'm going to tell you, about 9 months from now, the U.S. market is going to explode, because all trillions of dollars of capital is going to come home. Our defense supply chains are going to come home. So if we have any conflict over Taiwan or anywhere else in the world, we don't have to rely on Germany to give us all our ball bearings, or someone else to give us the ailerons for the planes. We will make them ourselves. He's also going to bring the pharmaceuticals home. So China won't be making most of our Advil or most of our pharmaceuticals. I mean, remember, we're an aging population. Our pharmaceuticals are a leverage for an enemy or an adversary to take advantage of us. So all of this is really a recalibration for 30 or 40 or 50 years of sort of runaway indulgence in the idea that foreign countries could take advantage of America. And he's saying this is not about a new turn of events where we take advantage of them. This is about the fact that we are finally saying, you know what? We've had a weed garden growing here. You've taken advantage of us for long enough. We're now going to stand up for the American worker, the American business, and we're gonna have a fair and even trading environment.
Yeah, well put.
Absolutely. Bob, you touched on a few great points there, but I think one major one is, it's been reported since 1979, productivity is up 60%, while a typical worker's pay is only around up 16%. And you have whole swaths of industry, for example, the furniture industry in the Carolinas, cash-rich businesses employing tens of thousands of people. You have corporate America come in, consolidate those companies, and because of what happened in the 90s, we ship it overseas, and we see entire industries decimated. When it comes to Maine, can you talk to,
Yes.
not only those constituents, but how do you make the case when you say, we all agree, in the longer term, let's just say corporate income tax gets reduced, there's less volatility in the markets, international investment will come dumping into the U.S. But how do you make the case in the short term that it's worth the pain to not only Americans, but your potential constituents in Maine?
Yeah, I'll take people back to that same year that you just quoted, 1979, to make the case. 1979 was a year, if people go back and look at the books, and I lived through it, when Ronald Reagan was the right guy to come and succeed Jimmy Carter, because interest rates were through the roof at that point. Inflation was through the roof at that point. Our trading relationships were handicapped. The average person was not, we were facing the upward spiral of what they call irrational expectations in inflation. And Reagan came in and said, look, we're going to break all of that. Okay, we're going to go back to basics. We're going to go for a hard day's work produces a great income. And ultimately, in Maine right now, what a governor has to do is he has to deeply cut. This is the #1 property tax state in the country. The combination of our income tax, sales tax, and property tax put us somewhere at number 2, 3, or 4 in overall tax burden. We have chased all these businesses out of the country. So there'll be a little bit of pain because of the tariffs, and Maine actually may be a beneficiary in the long run, even about the specific tariffs with Canada, because again, I'll use softwood lumber. Softwood lumber is cheaper. The Canadian softwood lumber, because it's subsidized, is cheaper in the United States and in Maine than the lumber that we produce. It may affect our lobstering. We may in the end be able to have, basically get a better price for lobster long term. If you even out the trading relationship, and it does take time to do that, it takes conversation, it takes recognition of the unfairnesses that have existed and remedying them. And then if you have a governor, and I will do this, I am literally on a track to eliminate the income tax in the state of Maine. I've got accountants working on it. The idea is not to shift it to sales or somewhere else, but to bring both property taxes and income taxes down. So what does that do? It keeps our kids in the state. It then brings businesses into the state. It'll actually encourage trades to stay in the state. Now the price of housing goes down. Now affordability comes back. At the end of the day, you either are on a virtuous circle or a vicious cycle. And what we have to do, we've been on a vicious cycle here in Maine for the better part of 30 years. We need to get on a virtuous cycle where we encourage businesses to come here, capital come here, get jobs to grow up here, and therefore our schools begin to feed kids into those jobs. And at the end of the day, we get the drug traffickers out of the state. So it's, again, what it was in my growing up years, a very safe and beautiful state that is pro-business, even as they are. Obviously, I grew up in the woods, as we love our woods and conservation, but we need to go back nationally and at the state level to understanding that everything we're looking at in this room, everything you're looking at in your room, everything your visitors look at around them are produced by private sector businesses, small businesses many times. We need to encourage entrepreneurship, encourage small businesses, encourage self-reliance, encourage what some like to say the American dream to grow up again in Maine, so that people understand the future is as bright as you want to make it, and the government is going to get out of your way. I say cut crime, cut taxes, cut the nonsense, and that's basically what I'm telling people. Get back to common sense policies, and if you believe in that, go. I mean, if you want to see Maine be that place, whether you come in the summer or whether you live here, go to bobbyformaine.com. Help me do it. Invest in the future, because it sometimes takes an army to turn around a state that has gotten badly off track.
Yeah, Bobby, you're so right. Unfortunately, we run out of time. We got to get more on this. So I'm going to come back to this next week with you, because I think there's so much more to dig in on China as well. But great to have you on the show today. As always, you bring a lot of wisdom, context, and history with you, which I think a lot of Americans today don't understand. It's great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you both very much.
What a great conversation. Always learn a ton when Bobby comes on. All right, we're going to take a commercial break. We've got one more conversation to do before we wrap up the show today. But before we do that, please head over right now to amac.us/justnews. That's amac.us/justnews. Why? Because for this month only, you're going to get 47% off a 5-year membership. That's $31. That's a steal. It'll pay for itself many times over. Go do it right now. Say thank you to our good friends at AMAC for making conversations like this possible here at Real America's Voice and Just the News. All right, we'll be back in a second to wrap up the show. Until then, have a quick commercial break. Welcome back, America. One final segment of this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, securing a more fair future on trade. Joining me, as he has for the whole hour, my amazing co-host, AMAC Senior Vice President, Charles Stuckland. Charlie, when we went into this, before we started the show, you and I were talking about the possibility that there's a great economic boon on the horizon that no one wants to talk about. Steve Moore said it, Congressman Burleson said it, Bobby Charles said it. It's something that got left out of the conversation in regular media, but here tonight, he was pretty prominent.
Absolutely. And, short-term thinking, that's the problem. Short-term thinking for the last few decades on what kind of trade deals we're making with foreign nations, how we're protecting the U.S. job sector, U.S. job market, manufacturing, every sector that exists. And now what you're seeing is criticisms of the tariffs with short-term thinking. You have people critiquing the current market levels, current market prices, but ultimately, John, I feel like what we saw this evening in these interviews were, for the people who fully understand both China and the economic side, there's a huge amount of potential here. The volatility, obviously there's going to be volatility, at this exact moment, but the potential for some stability with these pending trade deals, combined with, let's face it, some things Donald Trump's already admit, potential reduction on the business side on corporate taxes. I mean, it just lends itself to be a potential explosion in U.S. investment and growth. So I don't know about you, but I feel confident hearing that from our guest tonight. Yeah,
it was such a star panel of just people who really know what's going on. I heard three really important agreements. One, Donald Trump's not going to blink, so get used to him not blinking. Two, as Steve Moore said, buy U.S., sell China, which is don't be afraid to give up on China. Move them out. They're in their own trouble. And then three, get those tax cuts done. Those seem to be the three secret ingredients. Anything we miss that you think is important?
Well, I mean, those seem to be the ingredients as well. I agree. But let me leave you with this. So the battle over tariffs, over trade, over manufacturing, it's not just policy. It's personal. It's personal for every AMAC member whose job was shipped overseas. It's personal for every retiree wondering why medicine comes from halfway around the world. And it's personal for every grandparent who wants their grandchild to grow up in a country that still makes things and stands for something. So tariffs aren't necessarily, and I think all of our guests agree, tariffs aren't necessarily about punishing anyone. They're about protecting what we've built and rebuilding what we've lost. So at AMAC, we believe in common sense conservatism, in protecting the people who built this country, and in standing up to the forces that try to hollow it out. So thank you, John, for being a part of this conversation. I appreciate you bringing AMAC into this conversation. And for those who are not AMAC members yet, America needs voices like yours, and we need to be heard louder than ever. So thank you again, John.
You couldn't say it, and you did a great job as my co-host. What a fun conversation. We'll have to do this again real soon, Charlie. All right, folks, you heard Charlie. That was the best way to close the show. If you like the common sense you heard tonight, go to amac.us/justnews right now. Go sign up. Go join us. I'm a card-carrying member. You can be a card-carrying member. Point your camera at that QR code, and you'll